You're listening to the Oneofus.net podcast network. Digital Noise returns. Boy, we've had a lot of Digital Noise episodes lately.
That's not a bad thing.
It's not. People are always like, man, we should like if y'all had more often Digital Noises. I'm like, well, be careful what you wish for, because now you're getting them like twice a week, it seems like. But this will be our last one, but for like probably about 2 weeks, because I am about to, literally tomorrow, I start Fantastic Fest, where when I'm recording this, you guys probably won't hear this till Monday, but I am joined by Aaron, who bravely pumped through all these movies in pretty much less than a week.
Yeah, I think it's right at 7 days.
I mean, it was a good little stack of stuff to watch for 7 days. So you are a brave and noble hero.
I'm not going to lie, I'm slightly broken, and I did finish a bottle of whiskey when we get to a particular set I'll tell you about.
I believe you completely, and certainly we are going to end the show with that big set, because that one seems like it deserves a special spotlight. But yeah, we talk about, of course, Blu-rays and DVD reviews of recently released stuff. Just a little house cleaning. Please click on those links you see of the images of the movies we talk about, because that'll bring you to an Amazon.com page. And if you go to that Amazon.com page, you can buy that item and we get a nice little kickback. But let's say you get to that page and you go, you know what? I don't actually want that title. I want something else that's on Amazon. Well, as long as you start from one of our links, no matter what you buy from that point on, searching through Amazon pages, we end up getting a kickback. So use us for all your Amazon shopping. Just saying.
That's true. I actually took your advice last time and set it up as my actual link so it runs through it. And congratulations, you are now getting kickbacks from the endless amount of children's supplies I now buy.
Nice. I'll take it from wherever. It doesn't matter. Also, become a subscriber. That is the most helpful thing you could possibly do to keep Oneofus.net strong and healthy and continuing to pump out stuff. Literally, that is why I am able to keep putting out as much stuff as we do. Why we've been having 2 Digital Noises a week, because otherwise, I don't know what I'd do, quite frankly. I'd be that guy on the standing by the stoplight at the freeway as a will podcast for change.
Keep subscribing. I need to talk about movies. This is my outlet.
There you go. All right, with no further ado, let's get into the reviews. And although we're certainly going to go to some very genre-heavy, crazy stuff today, we're going to start with something a little more grounded. Even though it sounds kind of like science fiction, it's actually absolutely true. And that is the HBO movie, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Now, I was kind of shocked I knew absolutely nothing about this.
I had the reverse. One of our good friends a few years ago, back when we would go out drinking all the time, was this crazy alcoholic scientist lady.
Okay, she sounds great already. You got me.
She kind of is. And she was doing her research thesis on laboratory mice and was telling us about kind of the background of the HeLa cells and Henrietta Lacks, and so I knew about 30 seconds worth of it, but still enough to be interested with it.
Well, yeah, this idea, this lady in the 1950s named Henrietta Lacks, because it'd be weird if that was just some totally different person. She had cervical cancer, and her cells, which are now and was later known as HeLa cells, big H, big L, would become like cloned over and over and over and over again for the use of cancer treatments, and like just this list of like things that they were helpful with.
I think it's like tuberculosis, polio, cancer. I think it helped with HIV.
Yeah,
the movie actually begins with, here's a diagram of all the major illnesses and conditions that this has helped cure.
And they were like apparently incredibly durable and prolific. They described them as immortal cell line that like they just became the standard in the industry for research. And the story really kind of takes years and years later, as Rose Byrne is a journalist who is looking into this, going like, what is the deal with this and this thing with this woman who's nobody's talking about really? So she decides to try and contact her children, who are now quite elderly themselves, the main one being played by Oprah Winfrey, Deborah Lacks, who is a little Looney Tunes. She's a little on the loony side, but she's also had a really rough life, as she discovers the entire rest of her family, who have never received any credit for this, have never received any financial recompense for being such a huge part of medical history, and some of them are quite pissed off about it and very reluctant to even talk to anybody about it.
Yeah, I think I would be too.
Yeah. And it follows her sort of slowly finding out the story of this woman, Henrietta Lacks, and who she was and you know, what her life was like. And this ended up being a very popular book that came out originally. But this adaptation, of course, being for a lot of people more accessible just because it's not the amount of time it takes to read a book, is still a solid entry point into this really interesting story.
Well, and for it not being a theatrical release, I mean, it's HBO, yes, but it ended up really coming across with really good acting across the board. This is the first time I've ever seen Oprah Winfrey in anything.
And you need to go watch The Color Purple. It's so good.
I know.
So good.
I know. And I love Rose Byrne. But aside from the fact that occasionally I kind of felt the budget, especially when they would cut back to some of the past things, the actual life of Henrietta Lacks before she passed of cervical cancer, this ended up being one of the high points of the movies it gave me. I saved it to watch it with my wife. I totally got verklempt a couple of times while watching it, but it was really affecting. And the only thing that really bugged me, and this is such a nitpick, but there's a time transition that happens at the end that is, and I don't know if this is everyone, but to me at least, it was so poorly done that for the last 4 minutes of the movie, I almost thought it had gone from a real life story about real people and real events to referencing heaven, and it had all been an illusion. And
right.
I just
sat there. It was a little confusing.
I had to turn to my wife and go, wait, hold on. So what I'm seeing happen can't possibly be what happened. Is this what occurred, or is this what they're saying? Because I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, it did get a little confusing in the end, but it wasn't enough for me to want to throw it out the window or anything.
No, it's.
I think Oprah Winfrey's performance in this is so solid. So solid that, in fact, the MC at Stephen Colbert at the Emmys like shouted her out like, man, it is absolutely a shame on the Emmy voters that she did not even so much as get nominated for this performance.
And it was fun because this movie is like, I think it's the third movie in the past month and a half I've seen that have been low-key movies about mental health issues, where you go into it expecting one thing, and then as you really get into the meat and potatoes of the movie, you find out that it really is an examination on how this character deals with having a mental health problem and really going through their life. And so that aspect of it, seeing her be on point and together, and then just that switch flips, and all of a sudden she is losing control and she doesn't know what's going on and she's going into a manic phase. That was a really interesting it was an interesting journey to watch, and it ended up, even in the scenes where it was just a simple conversation, really had you on the edge of your seat because you knew they're talking about something that could set her off.
Yeah, it's a very positive representation of how to deal with someone who's that. I think they said she was bipolar, but
I wasn't sure, but that's kind of what I inferred.
But like she's goes to extreme levels on a drop of a dime, and how like sympathetically exhausting it can be to try and be like everything you can to do everything right, and still at this point you're just like, oh my god, seriously?
Actually, there's a sequence partway through where a character just, quite frankly, loses their patience, and had up until that point done everything they could, like you said, to be understanding and supportive, and watching that play out between both of them, both the character who lost their patience, realizing what they did, regretting it, but then kind of it was done, and then also watching Oprah go through the reaction of having that happen. It was pretty involved and affecting.
It was heartbreaking to watch.
That was one of the verklempt scenes.
Because you really are attached to both of those characters. Yeah. But yeah, I thoroughly recommend this movie. I thought it was quite good, and if you do get it on Blu-ray rather than just watching on HBO Go or whatever, There is a 2.5-minute family featurette that are just little snippets interviewing the actual descendants, the real people these actors were playing, and then another 3.5-minute piece that documents just where they were shooting on location. So it's not a lot of extra stuff there, but regardless, this does come highly recommended. As well, highly recommended by me at least, I have no idea how you felt about it, was The Prison, a South Korean crime action movie. The idea here is that we see this guy, we know that he was a police officer that has been disgraced, so disgraced he's going to prison. He's going to the big house, not just the little house, the big house. And that's dangerous, first off, to be a cop going to prison.
Well, and they even give him a special uniform, so the moment he walks in the doors, everyone knows that he's either an informant or a cop or something.
Right. And he tries to do the things you're supposed to do, like immediately punch anybody who gives you trouble and everything. And nothing really is working out that great. But it's not long before he sees who basically the king of this prison is, who's a relatively kind of seemingly soft-spoken type guy who just has flunkies fucking everywhere, and all the other gangs are subservient to this one guy. And he manages to be exactly the right place, the right time to do the right thing to get in this guy's good graces and get into, basically be one of his number one flunkies. And it's not long after that you start to put together that, okay, so maybe this cop wasn't disgraced. Maybe he's in this prison because he took about the most dangerous undercover assignment imaginable. The part of as the movie plays out and we start seeing more is understanding, okay, but why would you do that? What's so serious or so for this guy that he would do that? And it has, a lot of familiar themes with cop and criminal as the two main characters' movies, where like a cop going undercover, where you can tell there's part of him that kind of likes and admires this guy because he's very good at what he does. He's very generous with the people under him until he's suddenly not, and he doesn't brook betrayal very well.
So I'm glad you mentioned the twist.
Yeah.
So I mostly like this movie. Like, I liked it, I enjoyed it, I would recommend it. But it stopped short of me absolutely, loving it. Partly that was because the twist that happens when you find out that he's the undercover officer, that's something that, I think it was maybe 4 minutes into the movie when I went, oh, I bet he's undercover.
Right.
And
because it's a genre trope we've seen a lot.
And I wish that they had moved that twist up where that wasn't a twist, but really it was more about the reveal of the why, because that part was interesting and I got into it.
It's still relatively early in the film when they play their hand. But.
And the other thing that actually surprised me was how much more dramatic this movie is than I actually expected. Mm-hmm. So when I read the plot description, it makes it sound like almost like an Ocean's 11 type movie where they're breaking out and pulling heists, and the first heist you see is super cool, and then they flat out murder the people they robbed. And I was like, oh.
Well, which is to say,
shit, these are actual bad guys. This isn't like fluffy bad guys.
Yes, he realizes that you realize as you're watching that he realizes that this prison, this guy has so got everybody under his thumb, that includes the warden, and he is being let out of prison to commit crimes on the outside, and then basically bring the profits back.
Yeah,
and that stuff you really were expecting a straight prison movie, and you're like, that's not what this is.
And there are some amazingly tense sequences where they're leaving the prison, coming back to the prison, where the cops are trying to find them. All of that was flawless. As much as I said that I didn't love it, it was a lot of fun, and I would definitely recommend people check this out. And it's always fun to watch any kind of South Korean movie, because I swear that they have their tense, violent drama down pat.
They really do.
Like, nobody does it like the South Koreans do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And whereas I don't think it's one of the best South Korean movies of this type we've ever seen. It's one of the best ones I've seen recently.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. It moves very quickly. All the performances are really strong. It knows exactly when to completely get you with being suddenly violently shocking, and when to really get you with the slow reveals as we learn more about these characters and who they are and start to understand them, And I really liked the ending a lot, because it's a brave choice for the very end, and I was like, that I would not have seen coming.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say that the standout part to me was indeed, like you said, the bad guy. The villain of the piece, the leader of the gang, and who kind of rules the prison, the king criminal, or the Crimson King.
You're doing a King Crimson reference? Is that what's happening here?
Yeah.
Didn't know you were a prog rock guy.
Good, got there. It took me a while.
I don't know what else to say. It comes highly recommended. Again, and I think this is accessible enough that even people who don't have much experience with the Korean film industry will find this something really to enjoy here.
Interestingly, out of all the movies we saw, there's another movie which we're going to get to pretty soon that I ended up liking a lot more, strangely, because it's not up my alley.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this was actually one of the most accessible movies we saw.
Agreed.
I would recommend this to a lot of different people. It's tense, it's fun, it's involving, it's just an all-around good movie.
Agreed. Next up, we have a much older film from Arrow Films called Eric the Conqueror. My head, when I saw them saying this was the title they were sending, I was thinking it was Eric the Viking.
Me too!
Which is a totally different type of movie,
So that happened twice to me this cycle, and this was one of them.
Okay. But it is not. This is actually a 1961 action-adventure Italian film directed by Mario Bava. You know, the guy who's best known for doing horror and westerns. But this guy, throughout his career, he kind of did a little bit of everything. And he didn't do a lot of the sword and sandal stuff, but this was one of, I think, 2 or 3 that he kind of schlummed out. And it's almost a Mystery Science Theater type movie at points. You're like, wow, this is it's almost there. One of those movies they would have loved, but it's just good enough that you can see why they wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So this was the movie I was talking about that I went in. This was one of the first I watched because in my mind, I like to save the better ones for last. So I'm finish on a high note. And this was the second movie I saw, and I was expecting it to be crappy, and I ended up loving the hell out of it.
Oh, okay, great.
It's dated as all heck.
Yeah.
So very much. If this were made today, it would be about an hour longer because it feels like there's whole sections of plot or character development they cut out because it's that Ten Commandments vein of movie making where it feels more like a play that they do on screen, although with random scenes of brutal violence. I think in the first 2 minutes you see it was a woman holding a baby get a spear thrown at her, and you see it go through her and the baby.
Yeah.
And that was kind of I paused it and went, wait, I did not just watch that happen. Let me rewind that.
I mean, in case you forgot, this is also a horror director, right? He likes to throw his gore in there when he can.
So, I don't know. I got really involved in the story. I loved the pageantry of the set design.
It's very brightly colored. Although I believe, if I remember correctly, there's a whole thing where this is essentially the exact same sets from another production from the same studio, but that was very common at the time.
That would make sense. The Viking camp that they go into. Actually, so the movie involves a Viking king who gets betrayed by the British in the beginning, which that was weird as an American who doesn't know a ton about that era.
I was like, is that something that happened? Yeah. I don't know.
And so the Queen of Britain finds one of the 2 Viking sons who was left behind by accident
of the king,
and adopts him as her son, while the other son goes off to Viking land. I honestly don't know where it was, and became one of their rulers of the clans. And so you kind of have the story of these 2 brothers as they go in and out and interact with each other. And it's Italian, so every single woman in the movie is the most beautiful woman you've ever seen.
Very true.
Even a set of twins, which... and as a married man, I feel like I can say, "Oh my God!"
Yeah.
But
and a set of twins, which the moment you see them and you realize this is the story about 2 brothers who don't know they're brothers, but both are going to encounter these women, you're like, I have a feeling they're both going to fall in love with one of these twins, and that will lead to confusion.
But I mean, you can feel the datedness of it. There's a sequence on the high seas, an action sequence where it's clearly just 2 $50 boats that they have that just kind of moored each other, but they get their money's worth. But the sets, There's
I was just waiting for Euron Greyjoy to show up. That's all.
I was gonna say, I love that the Viking Kingdom has this giant epic. And I just blanked on the actual legend from Thor, but this giant world tree.
Yeah,
it's 800 feet tall. Thank you. That they're dancing around, and so I fell in love with all that.
That whole sequence had a sort of this is a Star Trek episode you haven't seen.
Yeah,
feel to it.
Well, and I admit that's part of my love of it, but this flat out ended up being my pick of the week. Actually,
oh wow, okay.
I had a blast.
I mean, I'm not the world's biggest fan of this type of period piece stuff. Not period piece, but 1960s genre stuff like this. And this was better than a lot of the things that I've gotten like this. It certainly moves quickly. It's very colorful. Like you said, hotties about everywhere throughout it. But overall, this just isn't the thing that normally, excuse the pun, floats my boat. But I get why anybody would get a lot from this. And if you're at all a student of Mario Bava, it's certainly an interesting footnote to his career that's not often talked about as much as his films like Black Sunday or what have you.
Yeah.
And
I have to admit, it's for a very specific audience.
Oh, sure.
I imagine
which is you.
My dad would love this, but I don't know. It really worked. And for it being a movie that came out, I assumed in the 50s, but in the 60s, it looks pretty darn good.
Oh, yeah. And they did a great job with the sound as well. It's Arrow. They pretty much across the board do as good a job as you can do with fixing up the sound and video on these old releases. And I can't imagine this was in great condition when they, with what they worked from.
They have a special feature on it I put this in quotes, the alternate ending.
Yes.
Which it's not really the alternate ending. It's the last 4 seconds of movie that they couldn't find a good enough quality film print. And just this random guy it looks like it's a scholar. Tim.
Yeah, it was a VHS copy he had of it.
And it is sufficiently ugly. I watched that.
It doesn't look terrific, but it's just in case you want to see this last missing shot, it doesn't really add anything to the plot or anything.
Nothing whatsoever.
It's not they were all aliens.
No, they even say it. They're like, this is the last shot of the movie. It really doesn't mean anything, but we did it because we can.
Yeah. There's an audio commentary by Bava biographer Tim Lucas. There is an interview with Cameron Mitchell from 1989, audio interview done by Tim Lucas, which talks about him collaborating with Bava. I believe he was the cinematographer. I'm not 100% sure on that.
I don't know. So I admit, I tried to get into Mario Bava a long time ago, and I think I was expecting something more like Dario Argento.
Okay.
And so I really have avoided him this entire time.
You should watch Planet of the Vampires. That's the one I always recommend. I'm it's so colorful and weird that it's really fun to watch.
Actually, so after watching this movie, I kind of have made the decision now to go back and give another shot to Bava and watch those movies that when I saw them in college went meh. Yeah. Because I just wasn't in the right frame of mind.
Tastes change as you get older, and they're definitely not as crazy and flamboyant as Argento is, who we'll talk about a little bit later.
Oh, God, yes.
There's also a visual essay called Gil Immortal by Michael Mackenzie that compares this to a Richard Fleischer film called The Vikings and, like you said, the original ending. So it's actually a really solid package for kind of an obscure little Bava movie that, like you said, Aaron found an enormous amount of fun.
I apparently love the hell out of.
Well, nothing wrong with that. All right, next up is a movie about movies called The Creep Behind the Camera, or as I like to call it, it's like Ed Wood, The Underneath.
So I spent most of the past week trying to explain what this movie was to other people, and I finally, I think I figured it out, and you're probably just going to tell me I'm completely wrong. It's essentially a documentary told entirely in dramatic reenactment.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's 95% dramatic reenactment with occasional people coming in like talking heads of the real people in his life talking about stuff. And that person in question is this guy named Vic Savage. He was a director who in 1964 made a movie that is often considered the worst movie ever made. And if you don't believe them, it comes included with this package if you feel like watching it.
God, I couldn't bring myself to.
I've seen it before with Mystery Science Theater. The Creeping Terror. It's incredibly bad, which is this alien monster that basically just shows up and starts eating people. Now, the thing is that this is a guy who you can't help it. If you don't know anything about him, you compare him with Ed Wood. You're kind of like, oh, well, he had no budget. He did the best, took everything that he had and like found a way to throw it into the movie one way or the other. The difference between him and Ed Wood is this guy didn't have any real passion for making movies per se. And unlike Ed Wood, he was not a nice guy. Ed Wood was well known for being incredibly sweet and lovable. Vic Savage, on the other hand, let's just say that his name, which was a pseudonym he took for himself, was quite accurate. He was beat his wife. He was a rapist. He was a thief. He was just a criminal on so many levels. I don't even know where to get started.
So I had very mixed feelings about this movie, but so I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like, it was really fascinating.
Okay.
Anytime they would go into his filmmaking process and the weird shit he did, and all like him stalking these random starlets or shooting.
Yeah, what's her name? Was it Jane Mansfield? I can't remember.
One of them was Lucy.
Yeah, Lucille Ball.
And
I thought it was
Mimi Van Doren.
Mimi Van Doren, yeah, who he actually got caught breaking into her house.
Yes. And or how he shot the guy who played Alfalfa in the hand. I'm assuming all the reenactments were
based on actual stuff. Yeah,
but like, so that stuff was really funny, and I was laughing and enjoying it, and I got that he was a bad person, but I was having fun. And then it would get into the segments involving his wife, or his kids, and
you just wanted to stop watching it. You were like, you're just so creeped out by this guy. You're like, I feel bad that anyone even spent money making a movie about this guy.
And I almost, even though it in no way makes him out to be anything but the worst human being ever, it still almost felt like I was endorsing him by watching the story of his life.
I agree. He's so sleazy. He has zero redeeming qualities. And I mean zero. Like, there's a point you just feel icky. You feel dirty even watching this thing.
4 different times. Basically, anytime it was him in his house with his wife, I had to struggle not to turn it off. And it was good.
I mean, there's that whole
it was just the story.
sequence not long even after they get married. Like, he brings home a drunk starlet that he's going to fuck. And he's like, whatever, do you want us to do well? Because she knows people and I got to fuck her because she's going to help us. So stop being such a bitch. And you're like, oh my God. And that's like the least of the shitty things he does to his wife.
I mean, hey, like, I don't necessarily mind the idea of a polyamorous relationship if that's what your cup of tea is, but that's
not what was happening.
He's just flat out telling her, I'm going to fuck this other woman no matter what you want.
In the next room.
And then does that a lot.
It's just atrocious and difficult to watch. And it's not like that because of the way they filmed it, or anything like that. It's just that who would want to watch that happening?
Yeah.
And it's, this guy's story is ultimately like, it's not a spoiler. He ends up dying not that much after he finished filming it and had to disappear because there were too many people like after his skin for money and what have you. But you're kind of like, fuck that guy, and I never ever want to think about him again.
I'm actually kind of grateful he's dead because, especially when it started to get towards the end, after he lied and told his wife that he was a Christian and had his kids for a period of time again. I was like, I would kick the shit out of this guy if I ran into him. I don't care if he's an old guy right now. I hated him.
Yeah, he was a real human monster, like no question. Just a guy who was straight up a sociopath and reveled in it.
And so it made it difficult because, from a recommendation standpoint, it makes this movie super hard to recommend.
Right, but at the same time, there's no denying it's a fascinating story about like probably the shittiest guy who's ever worked in Hollywood.
I think that the people I know who are film geeks would really get a kick out of this. The people who get the context or who get off on watching all the weird shit that happened in Hollywood back in those days. And preferably if you don't have kids or don't care about a loved one, because God, that stuff is triggering.
Very difficult. And there's audio commentary with the director, producer, and 2 of the stars. There is, like I said, a 2K transfer of the original vault material version of The Creeping Terror, the original film, which, once again, terrible. I highly recommend watching it with Mystery Science Theater instead.
Okay.
Because it's just that bad. There is a 25-minute making of the Creep Behind the Camera documentary. There is a 28-minute detailed video of the special effects team, how they made this version of the carpet monster that he uses in there. So if you wanted to make your own, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but if you did, here's how you do it. There's a whole bit that breaks down with commentary and behind-the-scenes on-set video how to break down a death scene. There's the director, very under a minute, pointing out some of the hidden homages to classic monster movies that he snuck into here. There is a bit with one of the actors in the film, Writer, talking about just having a conversation, basically, as between interviews. There's 11 and a half minutes of deleted scenes. There's an alternate ending. There's a Q&A at Screamfest with Frank Conniff from Mystery Science Theater being the moderator, although it's very clippy. It's very in and out. It's not just the thing recorded, which I mean, I'm sure we didn't need to see the whole thing, but at the same time, I'm more interested in hearing Frank Conniff than I am the filmmakers. Who TV's Frank, man. By the way, if you don't follow him on Twitter or Facebook, he's one of the funniest guys. Oh my God.
Actually, thank you. I need people to follow.
His stuff is a riot. And then the original trailer and then the Screamfest promotional trailer for it. So it's actually a shit ton of stuff for a relatively small release. But this was put out by Synapse, who was putting this out at the same time as another movie I've mixed up. The last movie we're going to talk about is actually the other Synapse movie. So instead of that, we're going to talk about the other horror set, the one that he was threatening Aaron over here earlier about how he is now an insane person because he watched all 5 movies in a row of the Phantasm franchise DVD collection. Now, it's not the first time it's been collected into a DVD set. What this is essentially is the cheap version of it, where they're all on a single spindle. It's all just the DVDs yanked from the other boxes. Yeah. There's nothing new.
The DVDs, you didn't even have the temerity or the beauty to give me the Blu-ray versions.
They didn't send me the Blu-ray versions. Like I said, because this is the cheap and the cheapy version, basically, that they trying to make an extra dime. And if you're somebody like, I want to have all these, but I don't need to spend a shit ton of money on the Phantasm movies, it would just be fun to have in my collection. This is really the one to get because, I mean, they're fine. They're fine DVD copies. And if you've never seen the Phantasm films, like Aaron hadn't, prepare yourselves. These are 5 movies, and there's also novels and comic books and other shit on the side if you really feel like following it up further. Made by the wonderful Don Coscarelli, who a lot of people probably know better from some of his other movies. Like, what was the one where Bruce Campbell plays an old Elvis?
Bubba
Hotep, yeah. But Phantasm was definitely his sort of big shot across the bow. Everyone's like, wow, who the fuck is this guy? Because this movie is freaking weird. Like, weird with a double underlined capital W. Weird.
Yeah, I keep waiting to see if you're going to try to explain the plot of these movies.
Oh, yeah, we're going to go there. I mean, the first movie, Phantasm, a bunch of people in a small town are dying in strange ways. And this teenage kid named Mike starts, as teenage kids in horror movies do, starts poking around, and he starts seeing something weird with this tall, elderly mortician that they refer to as the tall man, who is showing up in weird places. And he starts realizing this guy has been killing people and then reanimating their bodies as shrunk-down zombie Jawa-looking guys. Like if Jawas fell into an acid pit.
They look so much like Jawas.
They do. So he ends up, after convincing them this is all true, getting help from his older brother Jody and their friend, the local ice cream man Reggie, who, believe it or not, is like the only guy who's in all 5 of these movies.
Yeah, he is the bald, long-haired, ice cream vending, little bit overweight, a little bit older.
A little bit overweight.
Low-key main character of the Phantasm franchise.
Total,
what the hell?
Creepy scammer guy, you know.
He is pervy.
Yeah. But they work together to destroy the tall man while avoiding the Jawas and these really cool flying silver spears that he uses as weapons. All right. So I say all that, and you have no clue how weird this movie really is. It gets into, other dimensions and just fucking, I don't know what I just saw, but it was kind of cool stuff.
So if there was ever a movie that, on paper, is right up my alley.
Yeah.
It's Phantasm.
Yeah.
And so since we're going to talk about the whole series, I don't mind spoiling it a little bit. So, like, it ends up that the bad guys are either interdimensional or interplanetary. I still am not sure.
Yeah.
Aliens who are stealing the dead to use as slave labor.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah, so I got that. That sounds badass. Like, already I love that movie. It takes place almost entirely in a funeral home / crypt, which is weird but kind of cool. The problem I had with Phantasm is that I kind of despised the two main characters.
Oh yeah, they're not like wildly likable.
No,
for sure.
like
you're not watching this movie because you like those characters. This series, you're watching it because of how outrageously weird it is and keeps getting.
Well, and like
until it goes past until it goes past the point where it's even making sense anymore.
And I'm not going to go into details about the ending because you need to see it to really see it. But
right.
it has such what the fuck ending that I was convinced I had missed something. Like maybe I had walked away and forgotten something because there was a character who dies, who comes back, and then there was a character who I thought lived, who's now dead. And
yeah. It's a lot of stuff like they're in some sort of dream cycle a lot in this thing where often they're like things didn't happen because that was just stuff the tall man put in your head that you didn't really happen. So
I didn't get that.
Which is very nice for the writers who can they go, well, we're going to do something different, so we'll say that never happened, which they literally say
yes.
That never happened at points on here. The tall man made you think that happened.
But then you have the balls, which,
silver balls.
Which are
flying silver balls.
Flying silver balls, which is in like only one sequence in the first movie.
Right.
But oh my god, what a sequence.
Yeah.
And so yeah, basically they kill you in the goriest, most nasty, horrible. I have a relatively high pain threshold when it comes to gore in movies, and even I was struggling to cut. Yeah, I was like,
yeah, but now don't you totally want a replica one?
And I did like my hand shaking, like, oh, and yes, I totally want one.
Yeah, me too. Well, Phantasm 2 picks up right where the last one takes off, using some footage. A little bit of extra footage left over because they filmed this many years later, as you can tell, because the characters are clearly older. Although the character Mike, I believe in this one, was played by a different actor.
Yes, and
although the same actor returned for the other sequels, but it starts 8 years later. Mike is a mental patient having nightmares about this, and he seems to be the only person who can remember what actually happened. And when he's let out, he starts having dreams about Reggie's family, which is the long-haired guy. He tries to warn him about it, and they end up basically becoming the brothers from Supernatural and driving around the country in their awesome black muscle car with the back full of weapons, trying to track down the tall man as he one at a time decimates towns on his path of destruction.
This is my favorite of the Phantasm movies.
I think this is probably the best one. Yeah.
Although... because there is that aforementioned character who in the first movie dies on screen but then isn't dead.
Yeah.
I spent the entire film going, when are they going to turn bad? When are they going to turn bad? Clearly this is like a plant. Nope, does not happen. It literally did just never happen.
Yep. They do that in almost every movie at least once.
You get to see more giant floating, or not giant, but floating silver.
A lot more
action,
who now have like other things they can do.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it's this one or the next one where it comes out of someone's skull and it like...
Yeah, it's 3, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, well,
where it turns,
we'll talk about that in a moment. But you get to see a lot more action, a lot more of the death Jawas, which is what I'm going to call
a lot more of the other dimension.
Yes.
Like you actually go more into the other dimension and learn more about the other world.
And they start a plot, which I really wish they had followed with the series, where it seems like not only are the interdimensional / interplanetary aliens trying to like steal our dead to Jawize them,
and
use them as slave labor, but it seems that they're kind of low-key just depopulating or invading Earth.
Right.
Because they just come upon town after town that's ruined and dead, and it feels almost like The Walking Dead.
Yeah, it definitely has like more of a whereas the first one didn't as much. This is more of this is an end of the world scenario.
Yeah.
When we first start looking at it, a theme that continues and gets like more like I think we're losing this war as the series goes on.
And I will say that I had a friend watch this one with me who absolutely adores kind of weird, shitty, but fun 70s, 80s horror movies, already at Phantasm 2, trying to explain the plot was...
Yeah.
His only... After I kind of explained everything that happened, he went, so this is a series of movies in funeral homes. I was like, yeah, kind of,
Except
actually.
for the ones that couldn't afford to film in funeral homes. Moving on, Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead, the first one that actually has a secondary title there. Once again, picks off right at the end of the last one. Generally is the thing that these movies do. Where the tall man has gotten inside the heads, by the way, played by the incredible and sadly just recently passed Angus Scrim, who apparently was the sweetest, kindest, nicest guy you could imagine.
Well, that's how it goes.
Great sense of humor. Everybody loves him. And you're like, he is one of the creepiest actors to ever be on screen.
I'm convinced that the scarier, creepier, and more nasty you look on screen, the nicer you are.
Better chance you're going to be a good guy. Whereas on the other side of it, you're like, Brad Pitt's probably a douche. So he's gone inside their head, and which leads to a lot more of sort of like things where they're never really clear if things are happening, if they're real or not, because they realize they're kind of infected by him. And on this journey, they're just finding out, like, man, this apocalypse is happening apace because town after town is already dead, leaving now zombies instead of just Jawas, which are like people they're basically just zombies, they're like for all extensive purposes who come after them. And along the way, they hook up with several people, including a shit-talking black lady right out of like a blaxploitation movies from the 70s, who, of course, because that's what Reggie does, ends up sleeping with her regardless of her protestations earlier.
This begins the series staple of women. The only way I can describe it is bored fucking Reggie.
Yeah.
Where they say no, they say no, they say no. He
and
pushes,
finally
pushes,
they're like,
and then
oh,
they're
for
like,
fuck's sakes.
you know what? Why not? I have nothing better to do.
I think in this one it was a dream sequence, though, wasn't it?
I don't know.
I couldn't tell. It's hard to tell.
So I have to admit, so with one, I watch it, and I was paying a lot of attention, and was very confused. With two, I just kind of embraced the cheesy. This is when the fever dream nature of watching them day after day after day kind of started to add up.
Yeah.
And they all started to bleed together, and I just kind of started to lose my mind.
I mean, this is the point where the series goes from, wow, that's pretty insane, to, okay, this is completely insane. But 3 is still fun.
I will say, too, 3 has my favorite character.
Murder Boy,
yes. who shows up and with no warning just brutally, as brutal as you've ever seen, murders 3 people.
Yeah.
Like axe in the head, cutting throats, shooting, and is the most fun character, I think, in the entire series.
Oh, I completely agree. And I mean, I like shit-talking black lady, too. But, that's why I think this movie's really good, because those 2 side characters are so much fun in this movie.
It also has the audacity to pull an Alien 3 and kills off the kind of one of the central characters of 2 off-screen in between the movies.
Right.
Oh, where did that character go? Oh, look, there they are on the ground with half their face gnawed off. In the first 5 seconds of the movie.
Which, let's not forget, in this series, no one is ever really dead.
Yeah.
They just become something else. But they can... we'll get to that when we talk about the next one, which is Phantasm 4 Oblivion. Now, this is where this series goes off the rails. Which isn't to say there isn't stuff in 4 that is still kind of cool, because this is the one where we actually get to see the origin of the tall man. Yeah, who is this guy? Where did he start? Mike is still running from the tall man. For some reason, Tim, Murder Boy, has totally disappeared, never to be mentioned again, which is a real shame.
Which is actually another trend in this movie series, I have found.
And for the first time, we found out the tall man specifically is deeply into Mike. He's like, we don't really know why, but he's like, dude, I'm not going to kill you right now because I have better plans for you, which are always kind of vague, but okay.
Yeah, that's when I started to get really confused with the movie series, because it felt like Mike was something special.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also felt like, no, this is just what he does to everyone who he's after.
Well, it doesn't seem like he does, though. It seems like it's just Mike. And this is where you get into the whole thing with, like, where you can... put balls inside people's heads, and then if you're Mike, you get superpowers from it. And so I'm not sure. That seems like a bad plan for the tall man from the get-go, but I think his idea was he will be another person like me.
Well, and there's a sequence in one of the movies. I can't tell you which one it was.
They do kind of bleed together.
Where a woman falls down dead, and then like the top of her head pops off, and there's all these little explosions, and then a ball comes out. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And then conversely, there's also another scene where a woman pulls off her top, and her breasts are balls.
Yeah.
Which was such a weird effect that the entire scene played out before I realized it wasn't a dream sequence.
Right. I know.
I was like, oh, so he's going to wake up and she's going to be naked and they're going to have the awkward sex. No, this is real.
You're waiting for that.
Yeah.
Because you're like, of course that's going to happen because this is too bizarre to be real. But nope, that's the type of series we're talking about. And for all we know, in the director's head, he was like, no, I was planning on later that would end up not having been real. I mean, who the fuck knows? But Mike, with his powers and his sense of understanding now, has figured out how himself to traverse between dimensions. So he goes back in time to find the man that basically became the tall man. So who used to be just a normal guy who invented interdimensional transport back in, I don't know, but what the fuck time, 1876 or some shit. I don't know.
Using harmonic frequencies of dead people in a funeral.
Yeah, is that the first time that it got into the thing with the tuning fork where you can use that as a weapon? I couldn't remember.
Yes.
Okay, because all of a sudden if you hit a tuning fork, that'll make the spheres blow up.
Yeah, apropos of nothing, that was not set up in the previous one.
I mean, well, Reggie is looking for him, going dimension to dimension as well, including the ones in his girlfriend's breasts, and then we get to Phantasm Ravager, which is really the only film in this series I would say is so terrible that I just can't. I can't even recommend it as a bad movie watch. It's just, I can't honestly tell you what happened in this movie. Reggie is the main character. Like, sometimes it seems like he's actually, like, Mike and Jody are still alive and he's like a crazy guy in a mental hospital. And other times it seems like maybe one of them is in a mental hospital. And then other times he's just on the hunt. And, like, he's just popping so back and forth between alternate realities that it's impossible to follow this storyline. I will say, though, it made me laugh out loud that there's at one point, like, basically New York City or some big city is being attacked by, like, giant Independence Day sized, like, the metal silver balls. And I was like, okay, that's kind of funny.
And, man. So, Ravager... One, it took everything in my power not just start messaging you. Fuck you, man.
I told you. I even told you not to watch this.
You know what? So I had a work from home day and was able to like power through and ended up watching. Good God, the last 20 minutes of 3, 4, and 5, like all in one day. Did not realize I was doing it at the time. This is the movie that got me drunk.
Yeah,
I made it to the first second on-screen death, and it was so out of left field that I paused the movie, got up, and poured myself a whiskey, and finished about a quarter of the bottle by the end.
Smart move.
And so,
I don't even know what to say about this movie. It's so unbelievably scattered and all over the place, which is like comparing this to the other Phantasm movies. This is scattered and all over the place.
So it's the first one that Don Coscarelli wasn't making.
Yeah, he was a producer and was involved in story, but he did not direct it. You
can tell that the budget's gone because this went from feeling... All 4 of the first movies, I couldn't tell you when they were made. They all feel like late 70s and early to mid 80s weird horror films.
Yeah.
Which is impressive because apparently they were made after several years. Mm-hmm. Ravager feels like a shitty gore splatterfest college thesis project.
It really does.
The effects are horrible. It's just...
I mean, how are the effects in this movie when they should be, by all means, with like the better? How are they so much worse than the effects in any of the others? Like, they cheaped out and use CG stuff whenever possible that looks like shit. It's like if you're going to go cheap and use CG, you have to make sure that you do the best job you can with that CG, or it just looks like garbage. Otherwise, it's better just to spend that little bit of extra money and go with practical.
Yeah, I don't get how it's both the cheapest movie with somehow the biggest scope.
Yeah.
And it just... I don't have a single good thing to say about Ravager,
No, me
unfortunately.
neither. Whereas there's
not one.
even 4, which is the weakest of the original 4, has still got really good things in it.
There are cool
or at
parts.
least things that are fun to watch.
Yeah, like there are segments where I'm like, oh. And I said this to you before, I said this to my wife. I love the fact that the main character of the Phantasm series is a balding guy with a crown of hair down to almost the small of his back, running around perving on every woman on screen. Like, just, I love that that's the main character in a franchise.
Yeah.
But no, it's
such a weird series. There's nothing else like it. And I think everybody needs to give it a try, because I love the shit out of the first 3 movies in the series, because like I said, they're so absurd, but they're just so filled with things you would never have thought to do. Like, just so much neat stuff, so many neat ideas. They're a mess, but they're a really hysterically fun mess.
I'll give you that there are a lot of great ideas here.
Yeah.
It never ended up working for me. I will say that if you love that 80s batshit weird horrors, give them a shot. Skip Ravager. There's no reason to ever watch it.
No. Pretend it ends at 4.
And if you live in a state where it's legal, get really high. Like, really high. And you'll really enjoy these movies, I bet.
I suspect. Maybe not Ravager.
Yeah.
I was pretty drunk when I saw Ravager the first time, and I was like, no.
No, not Ravager. There is nothing that can make that better, I don't think.
All right, so let's move on to another movie. This is a movie. I thought we were watching the old movie with Boris Karloff when I got this copy, which just said The Ghoul. And I was like, I've never seen that. I've always wanted to see that.
I thought it was Ghoulies.
Oh, God. I would have been happier to see that. This movie is a recent film, little indie horror or thriller. Thriller.
Yeah.
That had really strong reviews from the festival crowd.
Did it?
And I was bored out of my fucking mind watching this thing. I'll be honest, I really had a hard time getting all the way to the end of this movie.
You mean the ending that, I don't know about you, but I called 5 seconds into the movie?
Yeah.
So I did not like this movie at all.
I did not either, and it's one of those films that's trying to be mind-bendy, a puzzle film, and you could not care less. When it starts, it is London cop Chris, played by Tom Meaton, is being called to a crime scene where it looks weird because there are 2 gunshot victims who came towards their assailant, they don't know who that is, who, as near as they can tell, kept coming towards him after they had been shot repeatedly, which is, of course, kind of strange.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, that's weird. And he decides that there may be a connection to a local psychotherapist. He decides to go undercover as a patient to investigate further, which, of course, feels a lot like that movie Shock Corridor, which I fully recommend, but
I've not seen.
Is a great fucking Sam Fuller movie, if I'm not mistaken. Great movie. And he's Alice Lowe, who is wonderful. She's been in a lot of movies you know her from. The one that hopefully everybody will get to see soon that I saw a couple months back is Prevenge, which is amazing. She's
she
writer, director, star, and 9 months pregnant the whole time.
Well, was she the, and I put this in quotes, love interest of the movie?
No, she was the one who was like best friend type of thing. Brunette, best friend.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought she was maybe a love interest for him because he kind of was obsessed with her, but
yeah, then it didn't really go there. And as it goes along, you're like, okay, so is he actually a cop?
Yeah.
Or is he like just a crazy person seeing a therapist? And it wasn't long before I was like, you know what? I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, because ultimately, the fact that he is investigating anything has zero bearing on this movie.
Yes.
Aside from the opening sequence, which I'll admit, that sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
It's basically about a depressed guy going through therapy.
Yeah.
And now,
half the sequences in here are him waking up or just looking confused at nothing and doing nothing.
Yeah, it literally never mentions that he's a cop again for the rest of the movie.
Yep.
Now, I'll admit, so there are 2 therapists that he sees in the film. The second one is this kind of pseudo-intellectual guy who's into cyclical nature, and has a spell on his wall, and he's very magnanimous and fun. Any scene with him in it It's like, okay.
Brightens it up a little bit. I'm like,
this makes no sense, but he's fun.
Can we leave this main character and just follow that guy? Because he seems like he knows how to have a good time.
Yeah, and very much like... So about 10 seconds into this movie, I went, oh, well, clearly X is what happens.
Yeah.
And as I watched the movie, I kept going, I really hope that's not what happens. I really hope that's not what happens. And, of course, that's what happens.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just... This is just a waste of a movie.
Oh, I agree. It's like there's nothing that's going to surprise you here except how boring this movie actually is. Oh, my God. It's so dull. I don't see what people saw in this. I mean, it wants to be something like Memento or something, and it's not because, quite frankly, there ain't shit happening through 95% of it.
Like, I'm going to go ahead and call it. If this movie actually had a component where he was investigating someone and that was in any way part of the actual movie, I would have probably enjoyed it.
Or if it had done a thing where, okay, maybe he's a crazy person, maybe he's a cop, but it kept flashing back to him being a cop and doing stuff where you're like, is he dreaming that? Or not? But you're like, you spend the whole movie waiting for him to be a cop again, and you're like, okay. No, so now he's just a really boring guy.
Actually, by the end of the movie, I was sitting here going, is he not a cop? Maybe his friend just like recruited some random drunk guy to use to investigate this therapist. But even his friend doesn't seem to really be a cop either.
Yeah. I didn't get it. Well, enough on that. I'll just say that there's a 36-minute in-depth interviews with a lot of the actors and director here. There's a 2013 short film that's about 9.5 minutes with a lot of the same cast and crew that, I'll be honest, I couldn't bring myself to bother to watch after this movie. I was like, I'm not sure I want to watch anything else by this guy. And then a commentary. Yeah, okay, whatever. I give this my anti-pick of the week.
Absolutely. Avoid it at all costs.
We're going to finish up with a movie that is one of those films that, like, even among fans of the director, is very divisive. Of people either think it's his very best or think it's actually of his early to mid period one of his worst. And I actually fall into the latter. I don't think Phenomenon is one of Dario Argento's best movies. And some people, wow, they will get angry and violent over the suggestion that it's not. So I'm like looking at Aaron all nervously. Is he going to be that guy?
No. I think that it's not a good movie, but it's enjoyable.
There's stuff about it to enjoy. I mean, first off, very young Jennifer Connelly, one of her first roles, who, of course, is this beautiful young girl who already, although definitely not at the top of her talents at this point.
Oh, my God, she's so bad at this.
Is still, you can tell she's got a lot of charisma. You know, you're like, okay, that's something right there. You've got, what's his name from Halloween?
Donald Pleasance.
Donald Pleasance playing a scientist who's really into bugs. What do you call it? Entomologist, I think. Yes. Who's in a wheelchair, of course, because you know.
You have to mention, of course, his friend / butler, the chimpanzee.
Yeah, he's got a chimp butler. Like, you're like, okay. Which is definitely feels at points like Argento having a little fun with Edgar Allan Poe, maybe even in a weird sort of way.
I have no idea.
Daria Nicolodi, who of course was his longtime collaborator and wife for a long time as well, has a small role in this. It's the story basically is not entirely dissimilar to Suspiria, which is about 1 billion times better, which is a young American girl ends up, first thing we see is a young local girl who's running around looking for help, and she is horribly murdered by a stranger we don't see. Total giallo eye with the black gloves and all that stuff, because that's what you do.
Argento is he shoots it well.
Of course.
He's a great murder.
Nobody has shot murders better than Dario Argento. But then Jennifer Connelly shows up. She's the daughter of a very famous and wealthy actor who's apparently shoving her off into this academy in Switzerland for girls that's chaperoned by a very harsh German mistress. Like I said, it feels a lot like there's a lot of elements here from Suspiria, where she forms a friendship with her roommate, but then her roommate starts noticing that she's been sleepwalking, and like from there, it goes into this wackiness where it looks like she's got a psychic connection to insects, or she can like control them and everything. And the sleepwalking. She witnesses murders during it, and so the murderer decides then he has to kill her. And it's not like you can't understand the things that are happening in the narrative. They're just kind of absurd to the point that it's hard to connect with them, and none of them are particularly creepy to me. Some of the killings look cool, but I had a hard time really connecting with this. And one of the things is, Connolly, who turned into one of our great actresses, did not start as one of our great actresses. She was just had that weird ethereal beauty to her,
So, this was the first movie I watched because I've seen some Argento. I've never really sat down and watched a lot. I found that I actually really enjoy his early giallo crime movies more than I like when he got into the absurdist stuff.
Like you like Four Flies on Grey Velvet and Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Bird of the Crystal Plumage is still one of my favorite movies of him.
You should watch Tenebrae, which is a little later, but that's like his return to the more classic giallo stuff. And I think that's, neck and neck with Suspiria for me for his best movie, but like where it's not supernatural as opposed to Suspiria.
So I'm trying to figure out how I could think of this movie. It's 3 different movies kind of in one.
Yeah.
One is the giallo murder movie.
Yes.
One is a drama about the daughter of an American actor living in a foreign boarding school who, by the way, in the creepiest thing ever, her roommate wants to fuck her dad so hard.
It is a little creepy.
That's so weird.
It would have been creepier if the dad had shown up and they started flirting together.
Which could have happened.
Yeah. It felt like it was going to happen.
And then the third movie is a superhero movie where she gains, as you said, the ability to communicate and command insects through sleepwalking.
Yeah.
And not to say that she has the ability when she sleepwalks. She flat out states that sleepwalking gave her this ability.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the movies, they're pretty much separate movies. They take place in the same screen time.
And with talking to her Professor X, which is Donald Pleasance in the wheelchair, who I'll admit my favorite...
Oh my God, I never put that together. He is in a wheelchair.
My favorite scenes in this movie are when the two of them are together.
Agreed.
Because you also happen to have a chimpanzee running around the whole time. So, that's, but yeah, you're like, oh, those scenes are really cool. And it feels like it's leading up to a better big showdown, a cooler thing to have happen. But by the end, I was like, yeah, that was okay.
Well, and so it's super silly. Like the first dream sequence, she somehow walks onto a balcony. Not dream sequence, sorry, sleepwalking.
Yeah.
She walks onto a balcony, witnesses a murder. The balcony collapses underneath her. She falls off the balcony, tears down a trellis, walks into town, gets hit by a car.
Almost gets raped by some locals.
I couldn't tell if they were trying to help her or rape her.
Yeah, it was very unclear, but they felt kind of rapey.
Yeah, then she falls out of the car, rolls down a hill, gets rescued by the aforementioned chimpanzee, and then wakes up.
Yeah.
And
it's like, what does it take to get you out of bed? This is like trying to wake up my wife in the morning when her alarm goes off. I'm like, honey, your alarm's going off. Honey, the alarm is going off. Oh my God.
So the other thing that happens, and so like I said, I've seen a few of Argento's movies, and I didn't realize this was a thing he did, is random sequences will be cut to heavy metal. Mm-hmm. And so...
and this one in particular uses well-known bands, which is less... He didn't do that as often.
So one of the other movies I've seen of his that I kind of enjoyed, but acknowledge it's also not a good movie, was Opera.
Oh, I like Opera.
I do too. It is fun. I enjoy the heck out of it, but it's also like, okay.
Yeah.
And it also has this thing where it will, anytime there's a murder sequence, it cuts to random heavy metal.
Yeah.
And I didn't put 2 and 2 together until I looked it up and realized that he made this and then made Opera, that clearly this was a phase.
Right.
Except whereas in Opera, it cuts to heavy metal whenever he's doing the murders. It's a stylistic choice. Here, it just kind of cuts to heavy metal randomly.
Yeah.
Like there's a sequence where it cuts to the metal and
awkward.
It's like, oh, clearly this is going to be a major thing happening. Nope. It's just her using a clothesline to unlock a door for 3 minutes.
I think part of the problem was that, like, whereas he's always liked heavier music, it's so sudden when it happens here. Whereas you look at some of his other films like Deep Red, specifically Deep Red and Suspiria, which use Goblin, who are a heavy prog rock act, to score the movie, where they're always kind of there. You know, it never feels weird when suddenly very loudly this hard hitting music is coming. That's one thing. But then with this, it's like, and now here's an Iron Maiden song.
Well, and so Deep Red is also one of the movies that I love the heck out of that he did. But
definitely is the second best score in an Argento.
I have to admit, though, like the one thing that Phenomena has going for it is it has one of the more interesting behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. Like, I love that this is Jennifer Connelly's first movie, and I love that she refuses to acknowledge ever working on this movie. That, like, the monkey apparently at the ending sequence, if they let that shot run 3 seconds longer, he bites the tip of her finger off.
Oh, my God.
Now, that is what I heard. It was mentioned on another podcast. They were talking about, like they kept telling her to get closer and closer and closer, and he just took the tip of her finger off, and that's one of the reasons why she doesn't talk about it.
Oh, my God.
One of the gooeyest, not actually gory scenes is when she falls into this pit of... I don't know how to describe it.
Basically, the people's backyard in Poltergeist after the coffins start coming up out of the ground, or their swimming pool.
She's in this pit for, I swear, like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And by the end, I was like, just get out of the damn pit, please. This is gross.
That can't be healthy.
You have any idea how many infections she might have?
You better go get a tetanus shot, girl. Well... Regardless how you feel about this, and like I said, for some people, this is their favorite Argento film, and I get it. There's a lot of very positive Argento things here and things to really love, but it never all comes together. For me.
Like ultimately, it is flawed as all hell, but I had a good time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I may have been texting my friends random shit that was happening on screen, but. I still had a great time watching the movie.
Yeah, it's totally worth watching. I mean, it's not really till much later in Argento's career that he started making movies that I'm like, I can't even recommend watching that. They're just so bad. But this one comes with a lot of extra features. There are 2 Blu-rays here, which have 3 different cuts of the film. There's the 83-minute United States very censored cut, which is known as the Creepers cut, because when it was originally released here, it was released under the title Creepers. There's the 110-minute International Phenomena cut, and then there's a 116-minute English-Italian hybrid that's cut into HD. So you get, you can watch whichever version you want. If you're one of those hardcore fans, hey, it's all here. But that's not all. There is a audio commentary track from Argento scholar and author Derek Botello and film historian, journalist, and radio television commentator David Duval. There's 2 completely different sound mix options on the 110-minute version of Phenomenon, including the 2.0 original stereo mix, and then there's a rare alternate mix with different sound effects and music cues. There's the English-Italian hybrid audio and complete Italian audio options for the 116-minute version. There is, and this is something I saw long ago when I was a kid. Somebody had a videotape of this, and I watched it. I must have watched it 30 times. Dario Argento's World of Horror, a documentary about his early work that is so thoroughly worth watching. Even though it's a TV documentary, it's kind of cheaply made. It's actually a really solid introduction to Argento, what his themes are that pop up a lot of his movies, his relationship of working with Goblin, a lot of stuff like that. And it covers Phenomenon, Suspiria, Demons, which he was a producer on, which I also highly recommend, directed by Mario Bava's son, Lamberto Bava.
That's the one in the theater, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that is an awesome movie.
That is an awesome movie. Dawn of the Dead, which he was involved in the making of as well, and in Inferno and more. Really great. I would buy this just to have the Blu-ray copy of that documentary because it's a lot of fun. There's an interview with musicians Andy Sexgang, who have 2 songs in here. The original theatrical trailer, the original U.S. theatrical trailer and radio spots, and then, of course, subtitles and yada, yada, yada. And, yeah, that brings us to the end of our show.
Yeah. It was a pleasure, and I'm hoping...
to have less horror next time?
I'm not even going to say that. I'm just hoping to have more movies that make sense.
I can't promise that. I admit, I have a weakness for movies that you're like, wait, what just happened? I prefer when the good ones where you go, wait, I don't care. That was fun anyway. Yeah. It was cool. that guy's head got cut off and then exploded, and then it tried to go down on that girl. Reference last recording with Aaron.
Licking all the way down.
Oneofus.net has been your one-stop shop for all things geek for years. But there's a side to them many of you have never heard. The subscription side. Subscribe and listen to great podcasts like The Breakfast Pub, The Original Gentleman, and the Watch a Movie With Us series. Head on over to oneofus.net and don't forget your towel.